The Festival of Convergence began 2 days later, and the pale meridian transformed into something out of a dream. Every corridor was filled with floating lights that drifted through the air like living fireflies. Music played from somewhere deep inside the walls, low and steady, like the heartbeat of the ship itself. Valori from every noble house arrived in ships that lined up beside the meridian in long, glittering rows that stretched farther than Ethan could see. He had been given new clothes for the festival. Valori made dark blue fabric that felt like water against his skin and seemed to adjust itself whenever he moved. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. He looked like he belonged here, which was exactly how he did not feel. Lena met him at the entrance to the grand reception hall. Her skin was glowing in warm gold and soft pink, colors that Ethan was starting to understand meant she was happy. She wore a gown that seemed to be made of captured starlight, and when she moved, it left faint trails of shimmer in the air behind her. "You look uncomfortable," she said, smiling. "I look like a soldier wearing a costume," Ethan replied. "You look fine. Come, stay close to me." She introduced him to the court as a cultural observer, a title that gave him permission to be at her side without raising too many questions. But questions came anyway. Every Valori they passed stared at him, some with curiosity, some with confusion, and some with open dislike. The Valori court, Ethan learned quickly, was not the peaceful place it appeared to be. Underneath the beauty and the polite words, there were deep cracks. The noble houses smiled at each other during ceremonies, and then fought bitterly behind closed doors. Old grudges ran through the court like cracks in ice, hidden but dangerous. The worst of it came from House Draven. Their leader was an old Valori named Lord Korath. He was thin and sharp-featured, with skin that stayed a constant, cold silver, like a blade. His eyes held no warmth at all when he looked at Ethan, and even less when he looked at Lena. On the third night of the festival, during a formal dinner attended by hundreds, Korath made his feelings known. "Your father invites animals to our table and calls it progress," Korath said to Lena, loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. He gestured toward Ethan with a lazy wave of his hand. "And you walk with one of them like it is your equal." The table went silent. Every Valori within hearing distance turned to watch. Ethan felt his hands tighten into fists beneath the table. But before he could move, Lena placed her hand gently on his arm. Her skin was cool against his, and the touch carried a clear message: stay still. "Lord Korath," Lena said, her voice calm and steady, her skin shifting to a controlled silver that matched his own. "Humanity crossed the space between galaxies to meet us. They came with open hands and good faith. If that makes them animals, then I wonder what word we should use for those who have not left their own system in 100 years, and still think themselves superior." Nobody spoke. Korath's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, the air between them felt like it could break. Then Korath turned back to his plate and said nothing more. Later in the quiet corridor outside the banquet hall, Lena let out a long breath. The controlled silver drained from her skin and was replaced by a tired pale blue. "You did not need to say that," Ethan told her. "Yes, I did. Korath pushes because he thinks no one will push back. My father is too patient with him. Someone needs to remind him that patience is not weakness." I wanted to hit him. Lena looked at him and almost laughed. "I know you did. I could feel your arm shaking under the table. But hitting a Valori lord at a diplomatic dinner would have been very bad for your career. My career is already in trouble just by standing next to you." "Then you have nothing left to lose," she said, and this time she did laugh. A real, full sound that echoed off the glowing walls. But the laughter did not last. As the festival went on, Ethan noticed things that worried him. House Draven's ships were moving closer to the meridian, more than protocol allowed. Valori crew members on the ship seemed nervous, their skin flickering in quick, anxious patterns. There were whispered conversations that stopped the moment Ethan walked into a room. Something was building. He could feel it, the way a pilot feels a storm before the instruments show it. A pressure in the air, a wrongness that sat in his gut and would not go away. On the fifth night, Commander Holloway sent him an encrypted message. The human intelligence team had picked up a broken Valori transmission. Most of it was unreadable, but one piece had been translated clearly. The princess must not survive the closing ceremony. Ethan read the words 3 times. Then he stood up, checked his sidearm, and went to find Lena. The festival had 4 days left. The closing ceremony would take place in the Resonance Hall, the largest room on the ship, where every noble house would gather together. If someone wanted to kill Lena, that was where they would do it. And if they wanted to do more than kill her, if they wanted to destroy the peace between humans and Valori, and plunge the Dominion into chaos, then a bomb in that room, at that moment, would do it perfectly. Ethan was a soldier. He had spent his life preparing for moments like this. But this was not a battlefield. This was a court full of aliens whose politics he barely understood, on a ship where he was a guest, in a situation where one wrong move could start a war. He found Lena in her study, surrounded by floating screens of text. She looked up when he entered, and her skin flickered with surprise before settling into the warm tone she usually wore around him. "You look troubled," she said. "We have a problem," Ethan replied, and he told her everything. Lena listened to every word without interrupting. As Ethan spoke, the warm colors drained from their skin, replaced by a pale, almost white glow that he had never seen on her before. He did not need to ask what it meant. Her eyes told him enough. She was afraid. "If this is real," she said quietly, "then it is not just about me. The closing ceremony puts every loyal house leader in one room. An attack there would not just kill me, it would break the Dominion apart." "Then cancel the ceremony," Ethan said. "I cannot, not without proof. If I cancel the convergence based on a broken human transmission, Korath and his allies will say Earth is trying to manipulate Valori politics. My father's enemies will use it to destroy everything he has built, the peace talks, the trade agreements, all of it. So we just walk in there knowing someone has planted a bomb? We walk in there, prepared." It was not a good plan, but it was the only one they had. Lena would change the seating arrangements in the Resonance Hall, moving the leaders she trusted farther from the central platform where she and her father would stand. Ethan would stay close to her, closer than a cultural observer should be, but close enough to act if something went wrong. He sent a message to Commander Holloway explaining the situation. Holloway was silent for a long time before she replied. "I am authorizing you to carry your sidearm into the ceremony, concealed. If anyone asks, you are not armed, and I never gave this order." "Understood, Commander. And Cole, if this goes wrong, Earth will say it never heard of you." "I know. Then do not let it go wrong." The closing ceremony was held on the 7th and final night of the festival. The Resonance Hall was the most beautiful room Ethan had ever seen. It was massive, big enough to hold thousands, with walls that curved upward into a ceiling made entirely of transparent material. The stars hung directly above, so close and bright, it felt like standing at the edge of the universe. Soft music filled the space, deep tones that Ethan could feel in his chest, like a second heartbeat. Every noble house was present. Thousands of Valori filled the hall in their finest robes, their skin glowing in 100 different colors. It was like standing inside a living painting. At the center of the room, raised above the crowd on a wide platform, stood the eternal sovereign himself. He was ancient, his skin a steady, deep gold that never flickered. Beside him stood Lena, her skin a calm, controlled blue, her posture perfect, her face showing nothing of the fear Ethan knew she was feeling. Ethan stood 3 steps behind her. His Violori robes hid the shape of the pistol at his hip. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the crowd, the walls, the platform, looking for anything out of place. His heart was beating hard, but his hands were steady. 10 years of combat had taught him how to be afraid and still function. The ceremony began. The sovereign spoke. Oaths were renewed. Music swelled and faded. The crowd pulsed with color, hundreds of Valori glowing in harmony like a living choir. It was beautiful, and under different circumstances, Ethan might have been moved by it. But he could not relax. The feeling in his gut, that pressure, that wrongness, had not gone away. If anything, it was getting stronger. Then he saw it. A small light, barely visible, underneath the platform. Not the soft glow of Valori technology. Something harder, sharper, blinking in a steady rhythm that Ethan recognized instantly. He had seen that pattern 100 times in combat. It was the charging cycle of a plasma core. Someone had planted an explosive device directly beneath the spot where Lena and the Sovereign were standing. He had seconds, maybe less. He did not think. Thinking would have taken too long. His body moved before his mind caught up. 10 years of training and instinct, taking over like a machine switching on. He lunged forward, grabbed Lena around the waist, and threw both of them off the side of the platform. They were still in the air when the bomb went off. The blast was enormous. A wave of white light and heat erupted from the platform, with a roar that swallowed every other sound in the hall. The shockwave hit Ethan in the back like a wall of fire. He felt the impact through his entire body, felt something sharp and hot punch through the fabric of his robes and dig into the flesh between his shoulder blades. Pain exploded through him, white and blinding, and for a moment he could not see, could not hear, could not feel anything except the burning. He hit the ground hard, Lena beneath him. His body had curved around hers on instinct, his back to the blast, his arms wrapped around her head and shoulders. Debris rained down around them, chunks of the platform, shards of metal, pieces of things he could not identify. The air was full of smoke and the smell of burning. Ethan tried to move. His legs would not respond. The pain in his back was spreading, hot and wet, and he could feel his strength leaving him, like water draining from a broken glass. Lena was screaming. He could hear her voice, stripped of its usual layered harmony, raw and broken and terrified. She was saying his name, over and over, and her hands were pressing against his chest, and her skin was flashing through colors so fast they blurred together. Ethan, Ethan, stay awake. Do not close your eyes. Ethan, please. He wanted to tell her he was fine. He wanted to say something brave, or funny, or reassuring, but the words would not come. The darkness was closing in from the edges of his vision, and the last thing he saw before it took him was Lena's face above his, her eyes wide and filled with a terror that had nothing to do with the bomb and everything to do with him. The news from Nethara hit the Kali Dominion like a shockwave. Within days, every military officer, every senator, every citizen with access to a newsfeed knew the story. A single human had dropped alone into an army of 20,000 and torn it apart. The Kali were a people who measured worth by strength and courage. They had spent 40 years believing humans were soft, clever perhaps, good with machines and trade, but ultimately fragile. Nethara shattered that belief in 16 hours. The Kali High Senate summoned Liara and Ethan to Kalith Prime, the Dominion homeworld. Archon Dravan Vorshan, Liara's father, wanted to see the human his daughter had been bonded to, the man he had once called an insult to their house. But aboard the Ardent Horizon, as the ship made its way to Kalith Prime, Ethan was not celebrating. There was no triumph in him, No pride, no satisfaction. Liara saw the cost in the days after Nathara. He stopped eating regular meals. He moved through the ship like a shadow, appearing and disappearing without pattern. He did not sleep. She could hear him pacing in his quarters through the thin wall that separated their rooms. Some nights the pacing stopped, and there was only silence, which was somehow worse. She found him 3 days after the battle. He was in the lower cargo bay, sitting on the cold metal floor in the dark, his back against a storage crate. His hands were trembling. Not from cold, not from injury, from something deeper. She sat down beside him on the floor. She did not speak. She waited. The silence stretched for a long time. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound. Then Ethan spoke, and his voice was so quiet she had to lean closer to hear him. I remember every single one of them. She understood what he meant. Not just Nathara. All of them. Every mission, every engagement, every person he had killed over 12 years. He carried them all. Every face, every sound, every moment. The program made us into something that could break armies, he said. But they did not take away the part that remembers. They did not take away the part that cares. I think that was the cruelest thing about it. Liara sat with him in the dark and felt something she had never expected to feel for this quiet human. It was not pity. Kaylee did not pity. It was recognition. She recognized the weight he carried because she had seen it before in old warriors who had fought too many battles and won too many times and lost pieces of themselves with every victory. She began to understand the shape of the man she had married. He was the most dangerous person she had ever encountered. He could walk into an army and come out the other side. He was also the most gentle. He spoke softly. He was kind to the crew. He asked about people's families. He remembered the names of their children. He had chosen logistics, not because he lacked ability, but because he was running from what the program had made him. He had volunteered for the peace marriage because he wanted to build something instead of destroying it. He was a weapon trying to become a person again. They arrived at Calith Prime a week later. The homeworld of the Dominion was a vast, mountainous planet, with silver-gray cities rising from deep valleys. The Vorshan estate sat high in the northern peaks, a fortress that had stood for 1,000 years. Archon Dravan met them in the Great Hall. He was enormous, even by Kaylee's standards, standing well over 8 feet tall, with deep silver skin and eyes like molten gold. He had led the Dominion through 2 decades of Cold War with humanity. He was brilliant, ruthless, and accustomed to being the most impressive being in any room. He looked down at Ethan Cole and saw a quiet human who barely reached his chest. The same man he had dismissed as a nobody when the bonding was first arranged. They told me you were nothing, Dravan said. His voice filled the hall like thunder. Ethan looked up at him without flinching. I am nothing, Archon. I just have a particular set of experiences. Dravan studied him. The Archon had read every report from Nathara. He had watched the sensor recordings. He had seen what this small, quiet human had done to 20,000 soldiers. He searched Ethan's face for arrogance, for pride, for the kind of dangerous ego that men who could do extraordinary things often carried. He found none. He found only tired eyes and steady hands, and a stillness that spoke of something far deeper than confidence. The Archon extended his arm. He clasped Ethan's forearm in the Kaylee warrior's greeting, a gesture reserved only for equals. In 1,000 years, no non-Kaylee had ever received it. Perhaps they were wrong, Dravan said. Liara watched from across the hall, and something warm moved through her chest. It surprised her. She had not expected to feel pride for this human. But she did. The following days on Calith Prime were filled with meetings and ceremonies. The political elite of the Dominion wanted to see Ethan. Warriors lined the streets, hoping to catch a glimpse of the human who had broken an army alone. Ethan endured it all with the same quiet patience he brought to everything. He shook hands, answered questions, and deflected praise with a skill that impressed even the Kaylee diplomats. But beneath the celebrations, something dangerous was moving. Naven had continued his intelligence work. What he found made the blood drain from his face. The Vorax Compact had not attacked Nethara on their own. They had been funded and directed by a conspiracy that reached into both the Kaylee Senate and the Terran Confederacy. Hardliners on both sides who wanted the peace treaty to fail. Nethara was supposed to be a massacre of Kaylee civilians by a force that could be blamed on human allied mercenaries. It was designed to restart the war. Ethan had ruined their plan, and now the conspirators wanted him dead. The attempt came during a formal dinner at the Vorshan estate. 300 of the most powerful figures in the Kaylee Dominion were gathered in the great dining hall, a room of polished stone and high arched ceilings, lit by floating crystal lamps. Liara sat at the head table, with Ethan beside her. Drevon sat at the center. The assassins came from the shadows. 6 of them, members of the Pale Veil, a Kaylee shadow order of killers who had operated in the dark spaces of the Dominion for centuries. They were the deadliest beings in Kaylee society, faster than normal Kaylee, trained from birth to kill, and armed with blades that could cut through armor. 6 Pale Veil assassins would have been enough to kill a room full of ordinary warriors. They came for Ethan specifically, moving through the hall like smoke, their blades aimed at his throat and heart. Ethan had been eating soup. He moved before the first assassin reached him. The dinner knife in his hand became a weapon. He caught the first blade on the flat of the knife, redirected it, and drove his elbow into the assassin's throat. The second one came from his left. Ethan stepped inside the attack, grabbed the assassin's wrist, broke it, and used the body as a shield against the third. He threw the second assassin into the fourth, then closed the distance on the fifth with a speed that made the air crack. The dinner knife opened the fifth assassin's shoulder. The sixth tried to flee. Ethan caught him by the back of the neck and put him on the ground. 30 seconds. 6 of the deadliest killers in the Kaylee Dominion, dispatched by a human with a dinner knife. The hall was absolutely silent. 300 Kaylee politicians, generals, and leaders sat frozen in their seats. They had just watched something that their understanding of the universe had no room for. The Pale Veil were legends, nightmares. They did not fail. They had never failed. Ethan stood in the center of the carnage, breathing lightly, the dinner knife still in his hand. Blood dripped from the blade onto the polished stone floor. Liara rose from her seat. She did not look at the bodies on the ground. She did not look at the stunned faces around the room. She looked at Ethan, and then she turned to face the assembled Senate. Her voice was clear and sharp as a blade. She named the conspirators. She presented the evidence Naven had gathered. She laid out the entire plot. The funding of the Vorax, the planned massacre at Nethara, the attempt to restart the war that had nearly consumed both their peoples. She spoke for 12 minutes without pause, and when she was done, the hall was so quiet that the sound of blood dripping from Ethan's knife was the loudest thing in the room. Then, she said something that the Kaylee Dominion would remember for generations. This bond was made for politics. I stand here now not for politics. I stand with this man because I choose to, not because a treaty requires it, because he is worthy. Ethan looked at her. The dinner knife hung loosely in his hand. His eyes, those quiet, tired human eyes, held something she had never seen in them before. Not pain, not control, not the flat emptiness of the weapon he had been trained to be. Hope. The conspirators were arrested that night. The Kaylee Senate, shaken by how close they had come to a manufactured war, voted unanimously on an action without precedent. They named Ethan Cole a protector of the Dominion, a title of honor that had existed for 800 years and had never once been given to anyone who was not Kaylee. When the announcement was read in the Great Hall, Drevon placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder and said, "You came to us as nobody. You leave as family." Ethan said nothing, but Liara, standing beside him, felt his hand find hers, his scarred, steady, trembling hand. She held it, and she did not let go. Recovery was slow and painful. Valori medicine was far beyond anything humans had built, but Ethan's body was a puzzle to their doctors. They understood Valori biology the way a master builder understands a house. Every wall, every beam, every wire. Human biology was something they had to learn from scratch, and they learned it with Ethan as their only patient. The shrapnel had damaged 2 discs in his lower spine, and torn through muscle that the Valori surgeons carefully repaired using techniques that involved growing new tissue from his own cells. It was painless, or at least the Valori said it should be painless, but Ethan's human nerve endings disagreed. He spent the first week unable to stand. By the 3rd week, he was taking slow, careful steps with the help of a neural brace the Valori had designed specifically for him. A thin band of living metal that wrapped around his lower back and talked to his spine in electrical whispers. Lena was there every day. She brought him Valori books that projected stories in light and color, tried to teach him simple phrases in her language, and argued with his doctors when she thought they were not doing enough. The court whispered about it. A princess sitting beside a human soldier, spending hours at his side, holding his hand when the pain was bad. It was unheard of. It was scandalous. Lena did not care. Commander Holloway visited on the 8th day. She stood at the foot of his bed with her arms crossed, looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You broke every rule I gave you," she said. "Yes, Commander. You carried a weapon into a foreign sovereign ceremony without official clearance." "You gave me clearance, Commander." "I gave you quiet clearance. There is a difference." She paused. "Earth Command wants to give you the Silver Star." "That is nice of them." "The Valori want to give you something called the Mantle of the Shield Bearer. Apparently, it has not been awarded in 6,000 years. I do not know what that means." "Neither do I, but it sounds important." She unfolded her arms and looked at him more carefully. "Cole, the Sovereign has asked Earth to extend the diplomatic mission by 2 full years. He says he wants to learn more about the species that produces men like you. Earth Command has agreed, and that means you are staying." Ethan stared at her. 2 years? 2 years, on this ship, with these people, with that princess who has not left your bedside since the blast. Holloway tilted her head slightly. "Is that going to be a problem, Lieutenant?" "No, Commander." "Good, because you are now the most important person in the relationship between 2 civilizations, and if you mess it up, there is not an airlock big enough for what I will do to you." The weeks that followed changed everything, not just for Ethan, but for everyone. The failed attack had torn open the wound that House Draven had been hiding for years. With Korath imprisoned and his allies exposed, the Sovereign moved fast. Trade agreements with Earth were signed. Scientific exchanges began. For the first time, Valori ships would visit the human solar system not as distant watchers, but as partners. Human engineers would be allowed to study Valori technology. Valori scholars would visit Earth to learn about a species that had reached the stars in barely a few centuries, when it had taken most races thousands. And at the center of all of it, quietly and without fanfare, were Ethan and Lena. They did not talk about what they were to each other. There was no word for it in either language. He was a human soldier from a rough colony world who liked bad coffee and flying too fast. She was a princess of an ancient alien empire who could change the color of her skin with her feelings. On paper, they made no sense, but on that ship, walking together through corridors of living light, sitting side by side in gardens open to the stars, they made more sense than anything either of them had known before. The day Ethan walked without the brace for the first time, Lena took him back to the terrace where they had first met. The stars were the same, vast and bright and endless, and the bench was the same, curved like a wave, cool to the touch. "Your people have a saying," Lena said, her skin shifting through soft, warm colors. "A bridge between worlds." "We do. I think that is what you are, Ethan. Not a soldier, not a diplomat, a bridge." He looked at her. This woman, this being from a civilization that was old when humanity was still learning to build fires. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her glowing skin or her star-filled eyes. She was beautiful because she was honest, because she was brave, because she had sat alone on a bench in the dark and let a stranger sit beside her. "If I am a bridge," he said, "then you are the reason anyone would want to cross it." Lena looked away, toward the stars. Her skin began to glow in a color he had never seen before. Something between gold and soft rose, warm and shimmering like the first light of morning on water. "What color is that?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had changed. The usual layers were gone, the three-toned harmony that made every Valori voice sound like music. Instead, there was just one voice, simple and clear and real. "It is a color we show only once," she said. "In our entire lives, when we have found someone who makes the distance between stars feel small." Ethan did not say anything. He reached over and took her hand, the way she had taken his when he was lying broken in a hospital bed with the court watching. Her fingers were longer than his, and her skin was cool and smooth. But when they closed around his hand, they fit. They sat together on the bench, a human and an alien, a soldier and a princess, and they looked out at the universe that stretched before them, vast and dark and full of possibility. Somewhere far below, the engines of the Pale Meridian hummed their quiet song, carrying two civilizations forward into a future that neither could have built alone. Ethan Cole never wanted to be on an alien ship. He was a pilot, a fighter, a man who had spent 10 years flying combat missions along the rough edges of human space. He was good at blowing things up and getting home alive. He was not good at standing still, wearing fancy clothes, and pretending to care about alien politics. But Earth Command did not ask for his opinion. They told him where to go, and he went. The mission was simple on paper. The Valori, an alien race bolder than human civilization itself, had invited a small human group to their flagship, a massive vessel called the Pale Meridian. It was a diplomatic visit, the first real attempt at friendship between the two species. Ethan was there as part of the security team. His job was to stand in the background, look harmless, and make sure nothing went wrong. Commander Lisa Holloway, the woman in charge of the human group, had made this very clear. "You are not here to make friends. You are here to stand still and look professional. Can you do that?" "Yes, Commander." "Good. Because if you cause a problem with a species that could wipe out Earth before breakfast, I will personally throw you out of an airlock." Ethan believed her. The Pale Meridian was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was not just a ship, it was a world. The corridors glowed with soft light that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The air smelled clean, almost sweet, like rain on fresh grass. The gravity was lighter than Earth's standard, which made Ethan feel like he was walking on a soft mattress. Everything about the place was beautiful and strange, and a little unsettling. The Valori themselves were tall and graceful. Their skin changed color depending on their mood, shifting like living light. Their eyes were dark and deep, filled with tiny points of light that looked like distant stars. They moved slowly, spoke softly, and looked at humans the way a grown adult might look at a noisy child, with a mixture of curiosity and careful patience. For the first 3 days, Ethan did exactly what he was told. He stood in corners. He walked behind the diplomats. He ate his own food, because Vylori meals made his stomach feel like it was trying to escape his body. He filed boring reports every night, and went to sleep in a small room that smelled faintly of flowers he could not name. On the fourth night, everything changed. He got lost. The ship was enormous, and the corridors all looked the same to him, smooth and glowing, and endlessly curving. He took a wrong turn somewhere near the observation level, and ended up on a wide terrace that opened to the stars. The ceiling was transparent. Or maybe it was not there at all, and the black sky stretched out in every direction, filled with more stars than Ethan had ever seen in one place. Sitting alone on a curved bench was a Vylori woman. Her skin was a deep, sad blue, and she was staring out at the darkness with the look of someone who had been alone for a very long time. Ethan recognized that look. He had seen it in his own mirror during the long months between deployments. He tried to step back quietly, but she turned her head and saw him. "You are the human soldier," she said. Her voice was strange, layered, like three people speaking the same words at the same time, but in perfect harmony. "Lieutenant Ethan Cole, ma'am. Sorry for walking in on you." "You did not walk in on me. This place is open to everyone on the ship." She studied him with those star-filled eyes. "You hold your body very tight. Are you scared of us?" Then he decided not to. "I would say I am careful, ma'am, not scared." She smiled at that, and her skin shifted to a lighter shade, something close to blue-green. "Careful. That is a good word. Most of my people think humans are only loud and reckless. Careful is better." They talked for almost an hour. She told him her name was Alindra, but she asked him to call her Lena. She said the short name was informal, almost like breaking a rule, and she seemed to enjoy that. She asked him about Earth, about oceans and weather, and what it felt like to live on a planet where the sky changed color. He asked her about the ship, about the festival that was coming, about why she was sitting alone on a terrace in the middle of the night. "Because even a princess gets tired of being watched," she said. Ethan blinked. "Princess?" Lena smiled again. "I assumed you knew." He did not know until the next morning, when Commander Holloway called him into a briefing room and looked at him like he had set fire to the entire diplomatic mission. "You spoke to Princess Alindra Sovade," Holloway said. Her voice was flat and dangerous. "Third in line to the Vylori Eternal Throne, one of the most important political figures in the known galaxy. You sat on a bench with her and had a chat." "She talked to me first, Commander." "That does not make it better, Cole." But it was already too late. That morning, a formal message had arrived through Vylori channels. Princess Alindra had requested that the human soldier, Lieutenant Ethan Cole, be allowed to accompany her during the upcoming Festival of Convergence, a massive week-long celebration that brought together every powerful family in the Vylori Dominion. The Vylori court was shocked. The human delegation was panicking. Ethan was just confused. He had only sat on a bench and talked to a lonely woman who happened to be an alien princess. He had not tried to be charming or clever. He had just been honest, and apparently that was enough to turn two civilizations upside down. Commander Holloway rubbed her temples and stared at him for a long time. "This is either the best thing that has ever happened to human diplomacy," she said slowly, "or the worst, and you are standing right in the middle of it." Ethan had no answer for that. He had been trained to fight wars, not to navigate alien royal courts. But as he walked back to his small room aboard the Pale Meridian, he thought about Lena sitting alone under the stars, her skin glowing that sad deep blue, and he felt something he had not expected. He felt like he wanted to see her again, and that he knew was going to be a problem.